Dodge roll? What is this? I'm not mad, just really confused. First, we get House of the Gungeon and now a mobile spin-off? Where's something us thirsty PC gamer boys can sink our teeth into? But rest assured, however, I'll still judge it on its own merits. If you haven't already heard, Exit the Gungeon is an Enter the Gungeon mobile spin-off game coming to Apple Arcade. I personally really hope it comes to platforms that people actually want to use. There's no real reason I can see why it wouldn't, but that's all it's been announced for. Similarly to House of the Gungeon, I'm going to go through what I'm able to extrapolate from the trailer and present it thusly. First and foremost, this game is not top-down. It's a vertical platformer, or so it claims to be. I'll get into that in a minute. This alone drastically changes the Gungeon formula, throwing the player into a much more difficult-to-navigate environment, at least in my opinion. The player is still armed with their dodge roll, however weird it may look in this new plane. The game seems to reuse a lot of the sprites present in Enter the Gungeon, those of the Gungeoneers, enemies, and the like. While I won't fault dodge roll over this, it can be very jarring to see a sprite you've seen 1,000 times before used in conjunction with all new artwork. There's this feeling of the product being both alien and familiar in appearance. The game's premise is explained in the video description. Apparently, the Gungeon itself has become a paradox, presumably due to the overuse of the gun that can kill the past that spawned the paradox in the first place. The whole thing is falling apart and those inside must make a mad dash for freedom heading up rather than down, fighting the last and most dangerous of the Gungeon. I'm not sure if many people have thought about this, but if you look at the Gungeon from the outside, there's a very large amount of both rubble and structure extending above the breach that's never referenced in the game. I myself have long wondered if there's anything up there, any strange Gungeon or unique places. It's possible we might find out. Then again, the beginning of the trailer starts with the pilot falling all the way down to this large skull, seen in Enter the Gungeon in the Forge after the Dragon and called the Time Veil by its sprites. Since the Time Veil is at the very end of the game, but we seem to be starting here, it could be assumed that instead of taking advantage of the unique possibilities presented by the Gungeon's spires, instead we'll simply begin the game falling to the very bottom and scrambling to get out. Sadly, I believe this is more likely to be where the game goes. On a very strange note, however, this Time Veil is for some reason in the center of the breach, taking the place of the giant bullet that should be resting there. You can tell by the boarded up rooms to either side. Was it not just the Gungeoneers that fell down, but the entire breach? Or did the Time Veil get raised up to the surface? So many questions. The description we're given also promises an ever-changing gun, which would explain the prominence of the sorceress at both the beginning and the end of the trailer. Rather than looting our weapons, we're simply going to cycle through them at random and take what RNG gives us. I've personally never enjoyed the sorceress's blessing, but we'll see how it actually rolls here. In the way of what guns you can wind up with, throughout the trailer we get to see various Gungeoneers making use of the bullet that fires guns, the wind-up gun, the elephant gun, the shotgun full of hate, the marine sidearm, the Colt 1851, the stinger, the mailbox, the regular shotgun, the alien sidearm, and the siren. The player is not seen using a weapon unique to this game at any point in the trailer. The Gungeoneers on offer consist of the usual cast, Marine, Pilot, Hunter, and Convict, as well as the Bullet and the Robot. A surprise was the inclusion of the Cultist as his own single-player character, fighting his own fight without the need for the protagonist. Looks like the lad finally grew up. We get no indication of the inclusion of the Gunslinger or the Paradox, however, not in advertising or in gameplay. Something curious about characters is that the trailer's description clearly states that each Gungeoneer will be using their own special route to ascend, which heavily implies that the characters will do more than just provide different starting boons, they'll also heavily impact the coming run. Speaking of the routes they take, what are the areas looking like? The first thing we see is a rapidly ascending wooden platform where the hunter is currently embroiled in a firefight. Simple enough stuff. However, in the very next scene, we're thrown a curveball from the promise of verticality with a horizontal stage involving the cultist fighting for his life on what looks to be a large, rail-mounted cargo transport, presumably in the mines. Following on, we see the cultist off the literal track but back on the proverbial one, riding more platforms upwards. Unlike the hunter's challenge, however, these platforms aren't being tugged up by ropes and pulleys, but being pushed upwards by an assortment of distressed-looking sentient balloons. These balloons, like most, seem capable of popping and leaving the player with progressively less space on which to continue not dying. The Marine seems to have been given a more stable deal of things, but not by much. He's seen ascending on a technological-looking platform through an abyss, leaving him capable of falling off the sides should he make a false move. Other than that, this particular stage seems fairly standard for what you'd expect. Now, here's where things get odd. If the promise of verticality was thrown a curveball by the cultists' mine excursion, then it's completely forgotten about by what seems to be perfectly self-contained rooms entered and exited through doors on the back wall. Sometimes these rooms are rigged with decorative ouching saw blades that the player must also avoid. Moving on from that, the final notable stage I can point out is this one, where the platforms themselves seem to be large gun-toting gun-dead that actively join in shooting bullets at the player. Some of these platforms are seen pushed down into their bases and unable to shoot. Throughout the clip where they're shown, this platform at the top also seems to be slowly re-emerging, while this platform at the bottom seems distressed when stepped on. I'm guessing that if you don't want these things to shoot at you, you gotta step on them, pushing them down into their base and rendering them useless until they're able to pop out again. From the platform in the center, I'm guessing that enemies also count towards putting these things in their place. In this clip, we also get to see the only usage of a blank, it's worth noting. The player gets hit and we're greeted with a blank-ish sound effect, followed by all bullets disappearing. I'm assuming that the player either used a blank spot on or was in possession of armor, which is seen a little earlier in the trailer. When this blank is used, all enemies on screen are not only prevented from shooting, but also turned blue and completely frozen in place as if the player had the Frost Amulet. Maybe they do have the Frost Amulet, and I'm just not aware of it. But I have no idea how the game will handle passive items or if it'll just choose not to. We get a brief glimpse of Bellow's shop in the trailer, with the hunter busting through the wall, but all he appears to be selling is health. The video's description mentions the Gungeoneer's desire for loot, but looting what? Our guns are given at random by a blessing, so what loot are we collecting? Let's now have a look at enemies. There are almost no new faces among the bunch. A list of all enemies I identified in the trailer should be going up the screen now. If it isn't, please yell at me. There's Bulletkin, Red Shotgunkin, Blobulons, Bullats, Muzzle Wisps, Gunnuts, Shotgats, Arrowkin, Bandana Bulletkin, Sheleton, Hollowpoint, King Bullats, GG Lead Maiden, Sniper Shells Gunzuki, Apprentice Gunjerers, and Det. Out of the trailer, I could only identify one unique thing I'd possibly label as an enemy. These silvery skulls that descend upon the Marine and his Technovator. They seem to come in long lines and he makes no attempt to shoot them. It's possible that these skulls are more hazards associated with the stage itself rather than compatible foes, but I decided to lump them in here to be on the safe side. Some enemies do showcase new behaviours or appearances though. Rather than making a break for the player, Blobulons instead hop back and forth, carefree to the chaos that's around them. Lead Maidens fire significantly fewer projectiles. Sheletons are stuck as half-inanimate piles of casings, unable to move and sending out rings of bullets around them. Arrowkin are only seen falling down from above in the balloon stage, with the sole intent of puncturing the fragile ascendants and inconveniencing the player. And Bullats look like lobotomites. Really, where did all the smirt go? Out of the trailer, we can observe the presence of two bosses and infer the presence of at least a third. The first boss I'll note is my personal favourite. I've long thought that the Bullet King's woeful yet furious Chancellor is criminally underloved by the community, and it seems as though Dodgerol shares that opinion, as in Exit the Gungeon he gains the title of Boss. He appears to have taken the lead throne and is using it himself in what I can only assume is his own attempt to leave. These are described as the most bitter gun-dead, and the very last of their kind in their collapsing home, and I've always felt that the Chancellor had it in him. Good going, man, you've earned it. The second boss appears to be a large fusion of the Beholster and the Cannon Balrog, or it could simply be the Beholster using the Cannon Balrog as a shell. For the purposes of this video, I'll be calling them the Behalrog. The Behalrog isn't seen for very long, but in that time we're able to see that the Beholster portion seems to have lost all of his guns. His tentacles are completely empty. The Behalrog exhibits Cannon Balrog-like attacks, rolling across the screen and bashing against the walls of the elevator shaft. Unlike the Cannon Balrog, who alone is completely landbound, the Beholster portion of the Behalrog seems to allow it to fly. The Behalrog seems to deflect player projectiles. As Toost pointed out in my Discord server, the black powder seen billowing from the Behalrog could very well indicate that the Cannon Balrog portion is still conscious and aware, which is horrifying. Poor thing. The final boss isn't shown, but is inferred. At the end of the trailer, we're given a snazzy piece of artwork of most of the Gungeoneers posing in front of what appears to be a large, grey, cobra version of the Amaconda. An Amacobra. I'm not sure why this Amacobra is important enough to feature prominently in the promotional art, but I'm terrified I'm going to have to find out. Some other things to note in the trailer itself are changes to the backing track. Now, as everyone knows, the flagship song of Enter the Gungeon is titled, appropriately enough, Enter the Gungeon. Exit the Gungeon seems to have its own special remix of the song that I'm going to assume is going to be called Exit the Gungeon. I'll play what I can decipher here. The original lyrics will be displayed on top, while the remixed ones will be below. And then the song turns back into the words Exit the Gungeon. The last teaser product I want to go through with you now isn't from the trailer, but from 3 images posted on the Devolver digital website. Images 2 and 3 give away pretty much nothing other than the fact that we can add Particulator to our list of known guns. But image 1 seems to show the game's hub area. We get to see all the Gungeoneers, again excluding the Gunslinger and Paradox. If they're in this, then it's definitely a super secret. Freyful wearing a crown, and the Grey Mauser wearing a golden necklace, Taylor looking at what appears to be a large console of some description, the Drunkard being depressed, a picture of the cut Cosmonaut character, which I'm elated to see, and whatever this is. The video description does promise some new faces to chat with along the way, and I'd say this is the closest thing to a new face we've been shown. It's definitely something alright. The final thing I want to touch on here isn't from the trailer or any other promotional material for that matter, but from Enter the Gungeon itself. In the descriptions of the Shellagun and Gilded Hydra, we find quotes from what seems to be a holy book of caliber, referencing the very end of the Gungeon itself. Revolvations 2212. As with all things, the gun must eventually end. The final bullet will leave the chamber, and all will be reloaded. And Revolvations 2-1. These are the words of caliber, she who grips the 7 sidearms in her hands and walks among the 6 loaded chambers, when the gun is drawn to the heart of the pacifist, and when the chambers are empty and the shells are spent, the last of the jammed will ascend to seal the breach forever. These passages are clearly more important now than ever, as the very fabric of the Gungeon rips and tears and all is cast into uncertainty and chaos. I have no answers for you here, only questions. What does 2212 mean by all being reloaded? Is the Gungeon perpetual after all? Will the cycle begin anew? Will the Gungeon be reloaded and assert itself once more as inescapable? Who is this pacifist to whose heart the gun will be drawn? And who is this mysterious last of the jammed, who will seal the breach and end it all for good? Mysteries I never thought I'd see solved and might just see the light of day. And with that, I bid you all adieu. Remember, the future's always on its way. Also, the game is meant to have hats, so that's going to be interesting.